Today's episode is actually an experiment that I did with Gillian Whitney, who is a wonderful person that I know from LinkedIn. She's been a guest on the podcast before. I've been a guest on her show, and she records as a LinkedIn Live and then repurposes into a podcast. Something new that she's done is to actually make the file available to the guest so you can repurpose it into your own podcast. So, this is what I'm doing today. So, this is actually a live show that I did with Jillian yesterday. And that's why you'll hear her introduce me. And I just wanted to give you the context of that. So let me know what you think. Do you like this type of thing? I'm always playing with and experimenting how podcasts work. So always interested to get feedback. So enjoy this. I've talked about AI hallucinations before, but Julian and I had a conversation about it. She wanted to amplify the message on her show, which I think is a great thing to do. Again, not against AI at all. I really think that it's a skill that people have to learn and investigate, but I do think that we need to ask questions along the way. Thanks. Enjoy.
We're live once again on another Tuesday, and I have a special Canadian friend in the house back for a second time because she's just so awesome. So I have Nola Simon here today, coming all the way in from Ontario, Canada. And Nola, before we get stuck in with our topic, where we're going to be talking about scary AI stuff today, can you just introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what you do, and then we'll just get chatting.
Sure. I'm Nola Simon. I'm a hybrid remote futurist. My company is called Nola Simon Advisory. And what I do is I help companies do hybrid remote work better. And the whole topic of AI was really just an experiment that I did as part of my podcast.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And it was an interesting discussion. And actually, so let me tell everybody our topic today. So it's a long one. Ghosts, hallucinations, and other scary trust leaps in using AI for research. And I am still the Google goddess, even though I don't do SEO anymore, but I still use search. I love to search. I love to learn stuff. I love to do research. And our topic today started with a conversation that we had. It was like on a Sunday, and Nola and I were having a conversation in the DMs. So let me just backtrack. And Nola, can you fill in the gaps of what transpired that day that even kicked off this whole topic?
I'd actually started with a podcast that I did with Cher Jones. And just before Cher joined the call, I just put into ChatGPT and I said, tell me about Cher Jones. And it gave me like a whole kind of nice summary of her because she's been active on LinkedIn for a long time and on the web in general for a long time, right? She's been on TV. She's got a lot of media appearances. And so nice summary of her. I looked up me and it's like, Nola Simon's a private person. I'm like, oh, not exactly, because I've been really active on LinkedIn, Facebook account. Like I'd been really active on social media, but I'd never really had a website. I didn't do media before 2021. So I was like, okay, interesting. But then I noticed that if you actually research it further, I got access to Bing, and you can actually use ChatGPT for it because I'm too cheap to pay for it. And it gives you more access because it starts indexing with what media you have. So it's current. But it also has hallucinations. And that's, I think, what we were talking about that day in the DMs. It's who is Gillian Whitney and what does it say about you? And I asked you to look at this summary because I asked it, tell me about Nola Simon, right? And it gave me a whole list of the media I've been in. And I'm like, which one do you think is true? Which one is not? Because it was a very interesting summary, but half of it was wrong. I had a Sirius XM radio show. I had been published in Entrepreneur magazine. I had written all of the media articles that all those talented journalists had interviewed me for. So I didn't write those. I was interviewed, right? So I was quoted, but I didn't write them.
That's amazing.
And
That's
so
amazing.
I sent it to you, and I'm like, I was sending it to people who know me and who I know pay attention to things that I write. And you were like, this sounds amazing. This sounds great, because you pay attention at a high level, right? It's not necessarily that you read every single thing that I'm quoted in or anything like that, but it seemed credible to you, right?
Yes. I wouldn't have actually, if I'd Googled you and
Yeah.
I'd found that, or if I guess you don't say Googled with AI. If I had AI do and I'd gone through, then I would have probably thought it was credible because I've seen you on shows. Why would I think it's lying? And if anything, whenever I'm using Google Bard because I'm cheap too, I don't want to pay for it. And I'm a Google girl. So it made sense for me to use Google Bard. But a lot of times when I do stuff, I look up people, it'll say, there's not enough information for me to give you anything. Now, to me, that's a valid response. So AI saying, I don't have all the facts. I can't tell you anymore, Jillian. I get that. But I don't get hallucinations. And I know Kevin D. Turner's been on the show and talked about hallucinations before. And there's probably some people that are watching us and listening to us and saying, what in the world is a hallucination? So essentially, Nola, can we just figure out that means it's making stuff up?
Yep. Basically, it's putting together a story that seems reasonable based on what you know about the person. I actually had another guest on my show, Anna Burgess Yang, and she Googled herself or put it through AI, and it told her she was dead.
Oh my God.
Somebody who has a similar name. She talks about grief because she's very involved with infant loss because unfortunately she's had some unfortunate experiences. So she talks a lot about grief. So it connects data in a way that seems reasonable and seems credible. Can you imagine like searching yourself and being told that you're dead? Like
Oh
how
my
shocking is
gosh.
that?
It
So in
is
my case,
shocking.
I was just looking for the media to see what it picked up. And to my horror, what I realized is it was pulling things from my podcast guests. So like I
Oh,
had interviewed Nicholas Badminton, who's a futurist, right? He's got a Sirius XM show. He's been a guest on CTV News. He has a regular guest spot, right? So it's pulling his interview shows from it. The podcast section said that I had been a guest on a podcast called Work Life Bloom by Dan Pontefract. Dan does have a podcast, but it's called Leadership Now. He's been a guest on my show. I have not been a guest on his show. And his book is called Work Life Bloom, not his podcast.
mm, mm.
So that's where this is a hallucination. There's elements of it that are truth, but you have to figure out what's actually true.
So it's almost like it's putting things together. And I think of it as I love to use Otter AI. I've been using
Yeah.
Otter AI for years and I love it how it transcribes things, but it's not accurate. It's
Mm.
good, but it's not accurate. And one of the things that I noticed a lot of times is that especially if I have a woman on my show, sometimes it can't distinguish between me and the other speaker.
Yeah.
And so I show up as them, they show up as me. So I'm thinking, putting my Jillian thinking Google thinking cap on, that maybe that's what happens with the AI. It's like you might say something and he might say something on the podcast, and the AI is going, I'm not really sure who said this. So I think it was Nola.
It could be something like that. I actually think it was pulling from show notes, to be quite honest, and this
Mm,
is where it's like it becomes confusing because I wrote the show notes referencing their accomplishments. So does it show up under my name? Yes, it's something that I wrote, but it's something that I wrote about somebody else. And that's where it's
mm,
that due diligence is really needed still. And that's why I know a lot of journalists have been investigating AI as well, because obviously, and I think that's a written profession has some concerns about where AI is going to go and how that's setting them up for success in the future of work. So they've been investigating like how trustworthy basically it is to actually do the job that they do. And at the moment, the way that it exists right now, personally, I don't think journalists have anything to worry about because that level of care, that level of investigation, that detailed research really still has to be done by a human because at this moment in time, the hallucinations don't have an explanation, right?
mm,
And this is
mm,
where it's not like you can report this to Bing or Microsoft or whoever happens to be running OpenAI or whatever and report the issues. There doesn't seem to be an obvious customer service to really report the concerns. And that's where when I discovered it, I had again, it's really more of an ethical concern, because it's like, this is something that's coming up. I have no idea who's searching me, who to ask that similar question. I might be the only person who's interested in my media. Who knows? But
I
from a
doubt that.
brand,
I doubt that though, because you're going to be on other shows. So sorry
right.
for interrupting, but I
No,
would
yeah,
say
yeah, no,
yes.
that's good. I'm glad that other people might be interested in me. That's the whole point of doing all this work and media. But how do I know that people are using that information in a way that's actually going to be beneficial? I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. So, from an ethical point of view, if there's information out there about me that may or may not be accurate, the only way that I could really be on record about it is to write about it. And that's where
Mm,
I did a podcast about AI hallucinations. I summarized what had been said about me, where I thought the errors were coming from. I did the article that I'd written, that newsletter that I wrote about the hallucinations, because, okay, this is what I see is happening. I don't want to stop doing my podcast, because I quite enjoy that. I do think that there's value in doing that. But at the same time, like, how do you stop it from happening? Because it's
mm,
pulling data from everywhere, and you don't exactly know how it's building out the solutions, and what it's actually publicly making available about you. So the only way I can influence what it knows about me is to write about it. And
mm,
so I'm essentially training the AI to be like, hey, Nola's an active advocate for accuracy in AI and paying attention and doing due diligence. So if you're
mm,
going to pick anything up about me, is I want to be on record that I've noticed this, and I think we have to ask questions about how this is going to be rectified, how it's going to be resolved, how we can trust that the companies that are offering these platforms are going to actually take action and improve this in the future.
and my brain is starting to think that you could get into some really nasty kind of like espionage against your competitors, or if somebody had it in for you. Like I helped a client this week with a bad Google review that had not, they were not a customer. And I learned it's very difficult to tackle a Google review when it's just a fake person, but it's a real person pretending to be a customer doing a 1-star review,
Yep.
and there's not really anybody. You can do a quick little flag and complain, but you're not really getting your side of the story. And I'm thinking to myself, there's bad people out there. So if somebody wanted to take you down, they could be writing all sorts of silly blog posts that nobody really sees, but maybe the AI is scanning that information in and it's now going into the public record. And you feel like there should be a way that we could say, hey, Bing, this is not accurate and whatever. But I think it's like the Pandora's box. It's been opened and I don't know what we can do about it now.
Yeah. And the SEO has been a thing. We know how to handle regular searches, but I don't think that anybody has really looked at, and maybe there are people who are looking at that and I just am not aware of that, how that sort of similar sort of search and expertise works with AI from a branding perspective, from a PR crisis perspective. I think there's lots of questions to ask that, because you're right. Unfortunately, the human creativity and imagination isn't necessarily just left to the people who want to do good in the world. You're right. The
Right.
criminals do have, and it's not even that it's criminal behavior, but it's they don't have best intentions. Let's just say
Right.
that, like
Right.
you mentioned, right? So creativity and imagination can be employed both ways, right? So where are the guardrails? And I did notice actually the other day, Bing is offering $15,000 for two people who actually want to help them test the guardrails and see if they can actually get Bing to go against its programming, basically. So the safety things that they've got in place to protect people. I don't exactly know what they mean by guardrails, but if you can help them identify gaps, then they'll pay you $15,000. Since I'm not sure that I want to do that, because I'm not exactly sure where all those profits are going and how those profits benefit society. As far as I can tell, it's really just a one-way street to corporate profit and
Right.
create more
Right.
billionaires. So
Well, and what you just have to wonder, okay, if you're taking on the role of break Bing, right? Hashtag break Bing, and you go and you're putting in all sorts of prompts to do things because you're testing it. Isn't it learning as you're teaching it, like, all sorts of bad things? It's, "Oh, thank you. You're feeding me with all sorts of good ideas that are not good ideas." So you just go, "What is that even doing?" By doing those searches. Like, I know recently you and I are both in the Espresso Plus group, and John had Darren Gibb come on and give a he did a presentation about AI, and it was a little aha for me to learn that different AI, like, I thought AI was AI. Everything was Chat GPT because I haven't really been paying too much attention to it because I'm not
Yeah.
really an early adopter. But I was fascinated to learn that some had a level of internet knowledge to a certain date, and other ones were closed and they don't have internet knowledge. They just have the language learning and whatever, machine learning, whatever. And it's we don't know that, and we're going off and doing research. It's like if we're using Google Bard or Chat GPT or we're using Bing, and we don't know what are the parameters for its
Mm,
research and where it's getting its data. Theoretically, Nola, could I go to 3 different things, type in the same prompt and get 3 different answers?
I would think so. Because they're all being
Wow.
trained in different ways. And so that's how what happened with ChatGPT versus Chat 3 versus 4, right? 3 cuts off, I think it's September 2021, but 4 knows who I am
Mm,
because it
mm.
doesn't have that that cutoff date.
But is 4 just smarter than 3? Do does is
4
the
is
answer
free
stops what?
unless you're actually using it through
Oh,
Bing, where you can actually use it for free. So
okay.
then it becomes this whole monetization thing. And it really comes down to trust in the technology, right? Trust is built into like competency, and do you trust the system to be able to do what it's supposed to do? I don't know if I trust it because I've already identified errors and I have no way of rectifying those errors. That right there eliminates the trust. Do I think that it's got good intentions if it's empathetic? If there's no obvious way for me to go back to the companies and express my concerns and really get clarity and action to fix anything, I don't know that I can be able to trust it at this point in time.
It's
Whereas
kinda it's kinda depressing. It's ki
but I think it's important to really talk about it because you I tend to be an early adopter. I'm trying these things out. I test it out. I'm not gifted in art, so all these people are using Mid-Journey and creating all these beautiful stuff, but that's not me. And the other part of it is all the intellectual property aspect of it. How are the things being trained? We've already seen lawsuits from major authors for basically training the AI on works that they shouldn't have had access to that have always had value. So it's really problematic. What is the future going to be? And that's where I think that we have to really experiment. We have to really ask a lot of questions and we have to demand that transparency and really connect it to how it's going to be good for society. If jobs are at risk, how are people going to get compensated? If the way that intellectual property has always been compensated, if that's going to be at risk, you
Yep,
know,
yep.
Taylor Swift's biggest threat probably isn't Scooter Braun or anybody who owns her original masters. It might be AI,
And then you
right?
think of if people are using AI that has misinformation and hallucinations,
Yeah,
then they come on a platform like LinkedIn.
yeah,
They're making posts that are taking basically that rumor, right? The hallucination and putting it in a post. You're feeding the machine, you're feeding the beast, and it's just going to create more and more. And speaking of LinkedIn, let's bring in some of our colleagues here from LinkedIn today. And we have Tina. She's joining us from YouTube today. So I love that we can come from so many different places. And YouTube is apparently one of the places that AI, this was another new thing that I learned. I don't know, maybe I'm the last to know, but because YouTube captions
yeah.
videos, those text files are
Mhm.
all being scanned by the AI bots. And so that again is contributing to the public knowledge out there. And if you've ever watched YouTubes with closed captions that nobody's cleaned up, it's pretty inaccurate. So
Yeah.
if that's the stuff that's going out, it's auto craptions make auto transcriptions for the bots. Not good. So, anyways, Tina says, I'm looking forward to this conversation, Jillian and Nola. I found another fellow expressing in the house. So, thank you, Tina, for joining us. We have Jeff. Hi, Jillian. Ready to watch Nola's encore. Oh, I love it. Jeff has an acronym for everything. See, the AI bots can't
Oh yeah, it is an
outmatch
acronym,
Jeff.
isn't it? Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, so.
Okay, so I'll read it out to you. So he's calling this your encore presentation, which means exciting next conversation on a relevant experience.
Yep.
Namaste. I love that. I love that. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. We have John, who's our fearless leader in Espresso Plus. I see you both, and I hope you've woken up by now, Gillian. Yeah, that's what I do. That's what I get for doing back-to-back lives today. So always fun. It's a challenge to be up at
Was he
4:30,
up
but
at
I did it.
4:30 listening to you this morning?
He was on the same live with me. He was on the same live. So
Oh,
so
there you
so
go.
it was fun that we did that. So here's Kevin's got such a big we have to sit up for this one. So Kevin D. Turner says, I'm amazed you are alive. You are alive, Jillian, after that early morning recording. Good to hear you, Nola Simon, go grand, never bland, brand to land, and keep rocking LinkedIn. So Kevin and I have talked a lot about AI, and he's actually got just so many things about he's got this marvelous newsletter, and it's like you see these AI bots and they're like marching, and it's actually scary to see those little guys because they feel like a little bit of an army. So
Yeah.
John says the
Well,
hallucinations are worrying, as we know readers are lazy and will trust what the computer tells them. So what do you think about that, Nola?
I think that's always been the case. You're writing anything online. That's been an issue with social media, and that's where some of the contention happens when people are debating things online to begin with. So we already know that's a problem online. You add AI into the mix, is it really just going to make things worse? Definitely, it's a concern, right? But I don't think it starts with AI. I think that's been a behavior for at least a decade, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's just really how can we get onto a better path with it?
So, what would just off the top of your head, what are like the only solution I could think of is because I'm especially thinking of this from a job hunter perspective, because
Mm.
even though I'm self employed, I always think of the job hunters on LinkedIn. And I think about if I was an HR, if I was a hiring manager or recruiter, I might be doing some research and going and checking people out and whatever. So you just think about how people could be maybe they're checking reviews and references and they run them through. Who knows what they're running them through these days? So I'm thinking, Nola, that one way to combat this might be stepping up your own content game. Like it's if you can continue to put
Yes.
more right information out there, aren't you adding to the pool of information and maybe it starts to flood the crud out? What do you think about that?
I think that for the majority of people, you are going to probably be the source of the majority of information that's on available online about you, right? It's not like there's a gazillion people writing about me. I'm like not David Beckham and Posh Spice, right? So I don't have a Netflix documentary, right? There are you have the ability to influence it, right? So I think that you're right. I think that if you haven't gotten involved in content creation, you might want to start because it's the only way that you have the possibility of influencing what AI knows about you.
Mm, that's brilliant.
Right.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Because it's like your silence means that the bots win. It's going to
Right.
tell your story. So either you tell your story or else other people could get your story wrong.
Exactly. That's right. Honestly, that's why David Beckham did that documentary. He's on record saying he wanted to do the documentary before somebody else told his story because he is
Mm,
so public, right? So you think about it from both perspectives, right? The only way you can control a narrative, whether you're super famous or not famous, is to do your own content. So the majority of us are going to have to do our own.
So based on all of this, from a personal perspective, how then are you now that you've seen these hallucinations exist, what's your recommendation for yourself moving forward if you want to do research? What's your thoughts?
It's actually interesting because you can use it to your benefit too, because every so often I ask it to list like who've my guests been. And so sometimes it'll tell me you, sometimes it'll tell me John, it'll mention share, but then it'll mention like these people that I don't even know and have never been my guest. And it'll tell me what I talked to them about. And it's like, oh, fantastic. I didn't know I had talked to the founder of WordPress. That would be a really good person to talk to. So I actually sent him a DM and I'm like, hey, like apparently apparently, according to AI, we've already had an amazing conversation on this topic. Would you like to join? So I actually use it to get introduced to these people that I would never consider actually approaching. So
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's
he
brilliant.
didn't
That's kind of,
respond.
you know what? It's I think we have to just, if we have an intention, we have an idea, I think we just have to go through, and it's, I reached out to somebody the other day because they just did such a terrible video, and it was sponsored on LinkedIn, and I thought, in all good conscience, I need to write to these people and say, "Your video is so bad on so many levels." And they didn't include captions, and people were flaming the video. So I thought, you're paying to be flamed. This is not good. Reached out to them. They totally ignored me. But at least I had that, okay, I just want to do the right thing and reach out. But I think this is a great idea. And maybe the thing is that it gives you new ideas.
And that's the thing. The hallucination is completely inaccurate. But when I start to research the people that they suggest to me, I'm like, this is actually a good fit for my podcast. So it's like, I never would have considered that conversation, that aspect of it. So maybe it's time that I actually make it a reality. So it gives me the impetus to really aim bigger, because it can see patterns in the people that I've selected and the topics that I've talked about that really are logical. And that would be a leap that I wouldn't think that I'm ready to take. Hey, but why not use it?
Exactly. Exactly. I love it. I love it. Let's see if we can get a couple more contents. It's just like my brain's not right. Okay. Comments. John says, Chat GPT once called me as the author of a book I have never heard of. Nope.
I think I
So,
told you about that, John.
and that's crazy. And again, you just wonder, okay, how is it pulling that information? And I guess the interesting thing would be, Nola, is if you were a guest on somebody's podcast and then they introduced you and they introduced you with all these things that weren't true about you, what would you do? What would you
I
do?
would start talking about AI. And this is where it's like the only way through is really to talk about it and have those discussions. And if everybody starts talking about and testing it, then that conversation gets amplified. And that's why I thought this was a good topic to have with your show, because it really just amplifies it and creates awareness. It's out there. How do you push the companies to resolve it? The only way you do it is to make that conversation get bigger and have it be like something that they can't ignore.
Mm, mm.
So far they're ignoring it.
Yeah, and I guess maybe a good sign is what you talked about earlier with Bing doing its, okay, let's help us break it and we'll pay somebody to break it and test it. And so I guess maybe that's a bit of, they're recognizing there's a problem. So whether they're going to be accountable and make big changes, but they're at least acknowledging that there's some problems.
Yeah, I got the impression that it's more about the actual technical guardrails, right? So
Oh,
being able to, like, how do you hack things, right?
okay.
How would you attack the system, like that type of guardrail? I don't think they're looking at AI hallucinations yet. So maybe they'll watch this and maybe they'll add that to their list,
I love
and
it. I love it.
there can be more clarity there.
And then as for homework, we'll go and see how AI thinks this LinkedIn Live. It says, what does it do with it? Because it's like, you imagine that sometimes if you have conversations about AI, the AI bots are not liking it. So they're just like burying it somewhere. It's like,
And what I found was interesting is there's not a whole lot of social media really influencing it, as far as I can tell. Bard is not available in Canada, so I haven't tested that out.
it's not?
No, I haven't been able to get into it.
Oh,
But
okay. I thought that was worldwide, but maybe not. I figured Google was Google's, but I guess maybe Bard is just maybe in America.
yeah, Bard
Maybe
I
it's
have
in
to look
beta.
into. Yeah, it could be. I'm not sure.
Huh.
Because I have a futurist group that I hang out with, and they're like using Bard and telling me all this stuff. I'm like, lame. I can't even get into it.
And the one thing that I will say, I've always been a big Google junkie. The
Yeah.
one thing I do like about Google Bard is it actually gives you references. So
Yeah.
if it says something and I run something through a search, it will actually indicate, here's where I pulled that from.
So
And,
ChatGPT-4 does that too. So through Bing, I've noticed that it does that. And most of what it's citing for me is really my website
mm,
and LinkedIn here and there. But so I think that as they develop, they're adding more social media and LinkedIn in particular. But
right.
yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so 30 minutes flew by, as it always does. So before we close out the show today, Nola, is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with today?
I don't want to dissuade anybody from learning about AI or testing it out or building the skills that's necessary, because I do think that it's going to be a huge part of the future of work. But I don't think we have to accept it in its form. I think that it's wise to advocate. I think it's wise to talk about it. I think it's wise to talk about what we want it to be and how we can use it to benefit individuals and societies, not just companies. So I think that the more active, the more vocal we can be, the better we can make the service.
I love that. Wonderful. Great summation. Okay, Nola, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for everybody who has joined us watching the live on YouTube or LinkedIn and or listening to the podcast later or on replay. So all is good. All is good. So thank you very much. And we'll see you guys all again next week. Okay, bye-bye.